How do you orchestrate the digital transformation of a large corporate? And how do you, as an insurer, make optimal use of data without compromising privacy? Just two of the many challenges that Tjeerd Bosklopper, member of the executive board of NN Group, has solved in the last years. The recipe? Perhaps his passion for transformation, technology, and for people from all walks of life. Tjeerd strongly believes that having a clear purpose and a team of talented people from diverse backgrounds is the key to overcome obstacles and make a lasting impact. And of course, some hard work, creativity, positive mindset, and sometimes a bit of luck. Perhaps he will share more of that in his keynote. Please welcome on stage, Tjeerd Bosklopper.
So my name is Tjeerd Bosklopper, work for NN Group. Responsible, of course, for retail, non-life and technology. And I think technology is what we're all here for and what we all have passion for. Very useful introduction on the use of AI, and the hot topic that is currently in town is to go back to the days when I was in college. I am a computer scientist by education, and there was on Friday morning at 9 a.m. there was a philosophy teacher who always asked questions, never gave answers, and the typical question that he would ask on this fantastic technology that you see behind me was, is a hammer a good tool or is it a bad tool? And this is a very similar question that people are, of course, asking about AI. Is it what we're all excited about? Is it going to change the world? Is it going to, change education? Is it going to make it available to everybody? Is it going to change medicine? Is it really going to just help the world? Or is there the fear scenario, right? So typically where we ended up when we were debating this was, well, it depends, right? It is ultimately in the hands of the user, in the hands of all of us, what we intend to do with it. We're an industry of trust. We're an industry of solidarity. It took quite a long time to build trust in the industry, and it can easily evaporate. So I think it is really in our hands to have a bit of a story on how we can apply it in a good way. So there are some pretty world-famous people here. So you probably all know Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, and then the other guy you may not know, he's Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, 38 years old. And yeah, so everybody knows ChatGPT, so I don't know if you all know Sam Altman, but he was, of course, the guy that created this large language model that we're now all using. And the journey of NN in AI started already about 2 years ago, where our head of data analytics, who's by the way also here in the audience today, has the habit to read every morning white papers on transformer models. Now, I don't know what you read over breakfast. It's not typically something I would read. But we were trying to crack a very simple case, because in our home market, we have the Dutch language, and there are fantastic models for English, for Chinese, but typically not for a niche language like Dutch. And the use case we were trying to crack was text summarization, right? And this white paper said, hey, the transformer model exists, it can actually do this very well. So we tried to get in contact with them, and took a while to actually reach a couple of the developers. And we asked them, hey, does your model actually work for Dutch language? And their answer was quite surprising. They said, we don't know, but would you like to try, right? So this is a bit where our journey started, and I'll share a couple of the use cases that we now have live in our group. So these are sort of the 4 pillars of use cases where we are currently advancing with AI. Now, the first one is typically underwriting. You see quite a few also of the insurtechs out here, and they all have different use cases that you similarly see here. So for instance, in underwriting, we've got attached rooftops, right? So you can, with satellite imaging, detect them. And then, of course, we provide a guarantee for underinsurance that's very useful for underwriting. There's lots of use cases in process efficiency, and I'll share a few later on. Fraud and claims analytics. always a bit more tricky, right? Because there, if you apply AI in the wrong way, it can seriously harm the trust. So I'll talk a bit about that. And then the last part, I think we all know in distribution, you've got retention model, next best actions, cross-sell. So these are typical use cases where you can apply it in insurance and where we are focusing today. Now this one is a very simple use case. It's on a bodily injury. Now there are many light bodily injury claims. So typically when you break a leg or something in a maximum claims amount of about 10,000 euros. So you would think, well, this is pretty simple, right? I mean, somebody breaks a leg, so you can typically solve this quite simply. But if you look at most incumbents today, such a process can easily take 3 to 6 months. And the amount of emails you get from clients, brokers, and all the different stakeholders that are involved is pretty substantial. So a typical claims adjuster would actually spend the first hour of his day just in going through all the emails, summarizing them, attaching them to the CRM to make sure that you have a total client file. So the first thing we did there is to automate all this automatic summarization and linking it to the client file and saving sort of an hour per day. And the second thing is that there is now a button where the AI model will automatically suggest the reserving for a light bodily injury claim. Now, you may think this is rather small, but if you're talking about hundreds of millions and a lot of claims multiplied for a large incumbent, every hour you save, every correctness you do in your reserving is actually a pretty big case. Now, this is the ChatGPT case that we have live. I think the case is quite self-explanatory when you read it. So we have call agents, they interact with customers, and typically after a call, they would do a short summary, which takes a bit of time, and then they would move on so that when the customer calls again, that somebody who picks up the phone actually knows what the previous conversation was all about, right? This is what most service companies do. So what we have live here is speech to text, right? So there is an engine, speech to text going to the GPT engine of OpenAI, automatic summary, saves about 3.5 minutes, 3.5 minutes times 7 million calls. So it's a pretty substantial efficiency gain. And I think there are two things that are really noteworthy here. So the first thing is that when we put this live 2 days ago, and this was in the retail banking call center, if you meet the people that are working with it, they've got a huge smile on their face. Because on the one hand, they're hugely excited by the fact that the summarization is so good, so that they hardly need to do anything with it. Plus they feel they can focus much more on the human interaction with the client. So there is this whole employee experience part where you take away the administrative hassle and you increase the value of the human interaction, which they typically love most. And the other thing is, you may wonder what happens here with the data, right? So are we now sending all our call data to the US and are training the OpenAI model? Of course we don't, right? So we use the enterprise Azure version of Microsoft with all the content filtering, so all the data stays within the company, and we use the algorithm that Microsoft provides. And I would highly recommend that to all of you, that when you use the summarization tool of ChatGPT, don't send your sensitive data to OpenAI, right? This is not compliant with European laws, but definitely also with the upcoming laws on AI. Now, here's the tricky one, so the fraud model. So for the people who are familiar in the Netherlands with the case on the Dutch tax authorities, a few years ago, the Dutch tax authorities very hastily introduced a fraud model to detect tax fraud, where it was basically a computer says no mechanism, so you get like a red flag, and then you cannot contact the tax authorities to have it removed. It lingers on for years and years. You build up debts, lots of stress, and lots of families in total despair with very negative consequences. And ultimately also the Dutch government almost fell on this particular topic. So it's a very hotly debated case. So we, of course, invited the tax authorities to share their learnings before we put our fraud model. And I think the fraud model that we have is not so special. It's quite a rudimentary model, But I think the way it is set up in its ethical design is something that I would highly recommend. So what we have is a claims adjuster, right, who will basically ask the model to run, and the model will come back with a high, medium, or low assessment on the fraud risk. Now, the model itself is not a black box, so it will actually have a human, understandable explanation of why the fraud indicator is low, medium, or high. And this is extremely important because it allows the claims adjuster to ignore it, or to say, hey, okay, so you found an account number that was previously used in a criminal case where there was like accident staging or something else, right? So then you have a very specific lead that you will look into, and you will enhance the human judgment based on the facts that you provide. So if an AI model is not a black box, but it is advising a human being in plain language what the fraud indicator is, and you make sure that the data that you feed it is your curated data that is substantiated and that you are in control of, it becomes very powerful. Now, what also happens is that the claims adjuster finds the model imperfect. So then he will actually talk to another human being called the fraud model owner, who is responsible for the model. And they interact together, and the model gets improved based on the feedback from all the claims adjusters. So you get like a learning loop, the model becomes better, and you can roll it out and still be in control. So I think this human-machine interface, where the machine is very powerful, it does all the administrative work, it is very accurate in its indications, but is adjusted to advise human beings in a very explainable way. I think this is sort of the setup where in many AI examples this can work. Now, the last example I have is with Spotter. Spotter is actually here, so they have a booth. So if you want to visit them, you can be in touch with them. So what they do is they connect to publicly available data on commercial real estate. They use satellite imaging, and they come up with a valuation of commercial real estate in a matter of minutes. Now, also here you may think, whoa, is this the biggest innovation we've seen in this century? Probably not. But again, the current process with various experts looking at various data points takes easily 3 months or more, right? So to have this in minutes and to have a very accurate assessment is very promising. So we are still in the pilot phase with them. So this is a partnership. So maybe we have to evaluate, re-evaluate, learn, improve. So this is still the process that we're in. But it's again a very good example of how you can apply AI in a very useful way. The ethics. So obviously you or most countries have adopted an ethical framework. So we also have this. And I think it's typically about 3 questions. Now, the first one, can we do it? To be honest, this is hardly a question anymore. There is so much we can do. I mean, there's so many use cases. The question, can we do it, is typically not so relevant anymore. Are we allowed to do it? Now, this is always a legal question. There's more and more regulations coming, so this will remain a hot topic. And especially with the new classifications, it could easily mean that almost every Excel sheet is called an AI, or it can be classified as high risk. So more is coming, always something that we would carefully check. But the most important question is, do we want to do it, right? And here, my sort of, so the ethical framework is quite long, but I'll sort of share 4 design principles. So the first thing that I would recommend on AI, especially on these AI assistants, really keep a human in the lead and have the human judgment on the things that you do, like we've always done very well, right? If you introduce an AI, make sure it is not a black box, and make sure you have a model owner who does the backtesting against the bias, right? Because even the data that you will feed the AI mechanism can be based on biased data. So you need to backtest this and you need to evidence this. So there's a lot of governance, so make sure you have a central repository of all your AI models, because the time will come that auditors will come and visit, and they will want to know, what was the model that you had live in 2021, how did it work, what were the design principles? If you don't have it audited, and you just have it anywhere across the company, and you give total freedom, you run the risk that at some point in time you're not in control here. So there's quite a few things, just like what I said on ChatGPT. Make sure you have your controlled environment, make sure you are the owner of your own data. These are some of the things that I would highly recommend to you. And yeah, lastly, if you ever put an AI model live, just make sure you understand it yourself. So sit with the AI model, talk with the model owner, and before you scale it, make your own leadership judgment on whether it is compliant, what would you think is really useful for society and for your customers. There's something in human judgment. So there's this famous book by Daniel Kahneman, which is only about human judgment. Now, human judgment, as we all know, is also not perfect. So in claims and underwriting, the median difference is about 50%, 50, right? So our current practice, apparently, we have a tolerance of a median difference in this type of statistics. So to make claims, underwriting, these types of things more of a science, and yes, the AI models will improve this accuracy, but still it will not be perfect. But the power of this model, significantly increasing the consistency, increasing the speed, increasing the customer experience, I think is a fantastic opportunity for all of the use cases that I shared in the 4 categories. But as with the hammer, it is a very powerful tool. We are an industry that exists for 100 years, and we want it to exist for another hundreds of years. And this is about the trust, and this is in our hands to create the use cases that are very powerful, but that are compliant with the ethics that we have as our industry. And that is what I would make my call to action to you. Make sure that you use this powerful tool to the best of the industry, and then I'm quite sure that our industry will actually have a much better customer service. That was my short story. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be around, and my colleagues are also here, and I wish you a very pleasant day here at the DIA. Thank you.